What if I told you that a simple construction worker with no wealth at all managed to change the life of a billionaire forever? Sounds unlikely, doesn't it? But that's exactly what happened when Michael Brown reached out to a lost, ragged stranger without knowing he was Gerald Miller, a powerful man who had lost his memory and who would soon discover in the heart of a humble family the true meaning of wealth. A story marked by unexpected choices, improbable encounters, and a destiny that brought together worlds as distant as simplicity and abundance. At the peak of this journey, what was at stake was not money or status, but something far greater: trust, love, and the power of gratitude. And the most surprising part is that in the end, it wasn't the billionaire who gave the greatest gift, but the construction worker. With his compassion and courage, he proved that true greatness is born from the simplest gestures. If you believe stories like this can transform lives, subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any part of this inspiring journey. Michael Brown was walking home after an exhausting day at the construction site. Sweat still dripped down his forehead, his shirt stained with cement revealed his hard labor, and his mind longed only for rest. He wandered through the nearly empty streets, picturing the simple dinner his wife would be preparing, and the laughter of his children as he walked through the door. It was a routine of sacrifice, but also of quiet love. On his way, a sudden noise broke his thoughts. A strange man, in ragged clothes and with a frail body, collapsed right in front of him. Many turned their heads, some even stepped back, but no one moved at first. In that instant, Michael acted instinctively, as if he had rehearsed that gesture his entire life. He ran and held the stranger's body. The scene was distressing. The man was struggling to breathe. Blood marked the pavement, and the silence of the street weighed heavier than any word. Michael did not hesitate. He shouted for help, asked someone to call an ambulance, and stayed firmly by his side. His attitude revealed something simple yet powerful. Compassion does not wait for perfect conditions to show itself. Those around whispered quietly, some merely watching, too afraid to come closer. It is curious how, when faced with someone else's pain, people often freeze. Yet it is precisely in such moments that a person's character is revealed. Michael did not know this man, did not know his story, but he chose to see in him something non-negotiable: the value of life. While waiting for help, Michael tried to keep the man conscious, speaking to him, urging him to hold on. The stranger, through groans, could barely respond. Time seemed to move slowly, as if every second was a battle against the inevitable. But the presence of someone willing to fight alongside him made all the difference. Michael's attitude went beyond a simple impulse. It reflected an essence shaped by hard work, daily struggles, and the belief that no one should be left behind. His simplicity concealed a greatness that, in that moment, became clear to everyone watching. The atmosphere, once indifferent, began to change. A neighbor stepped forward with a cloth to stop the bleeding. Another offered water, and little by little, Michael's solitary gesture inspired the courage hidden in other hearts. Such is the power of example. A single act can awaken bravery in others. That day, Michael's path crossed with the strangers in an unexpected way. But what seemed like just an accident would soon turn into something far greater. He did not yet know it, but he had just opened the door to a story that would change not only the course of his own life, but also the destiny of everyone around him. The sound of the siren pierced the silence of the night as the ambulance carried the unknown man. Michael, still shaken by the incident, rode alongside, holding tightly to the hope that the stranger would survive. Inside the vehicle, time seemed suspended, every second a battle against the fragility of life. It felt as if something much greater was about to be revealed. At the hospital, doctors rushed around the patient while Michael waited in the hallway. The smell of antiseptic and the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the cold, white environment. He watched silently, reflecting on how a simple encounter on the street could change the course of an entire story. The ragged man, who minutes before had been a stranger, now depended on him. The examinations brought an unexpected revelation. The man had lost his memory. No documents, no name, no recollection that could reveal his identity. It was as if he had been erased from the world. This absence of answers puzzled the doctors, who exchanged glances, unsure of what to do in the face of such uncertainty. Michael was called in to hear the diagnosis. The doctor's voice was firm, yet cautious. "He doesn't remember anything. We don't know who he is or where he came from. We'll have to wait." The words fell on Michael like an invisible weight. After all, how could he help someone who didn't even know who he was? The hospital continued its routine, patients coming and going. But this case was different. It wasn't only about physical health, but about identity, dignity, and fate. A human being without a past, without an apparent story, lay before them. And suddenly the silence of that man seemed to scream louder than any physical pain. Michael walked through the cold corridors, reflecting on what he had heard. He glanced at the doors of the rooms, each one hiding unknown stories, suspended lives. And in the midst of so many stories, this one seemed to call to him, as if chance itself had chosen him to carry this mystery on his shoulders. Hours passed, and no relatives appeared. No phone calls came asking for information, no records were found. It was as though the man didn't exist for anyone. Exhausted, Michael leaned against the hospital wall and realized, sometimes the most important encounters in life appear without warning, placing unexpected responsibilities in our hands. The man remained silent, lying in bed, breathing with difficulty. The machines beeped in rhythm, a reminder that life is fragile yet persistent. And without realizing it, Michael no longer saw him as just a stranger. Something inside told him that this mystery was far from over, and that his presence would be decisive in what was yet to come. Michael left the hospital with slow steps, his mind weighed down by a new burden. The stranger had no family, no memories, not even a name to cling to. It would have been easy to turn his back and move on with life. After all, his own struggles were already heavy. But something inside him refused to let go. There was a flame, pushing him to care for that man. At home, Sarah greeted him with the worried expression of someone who knew her husband's silences well. She understood that when Michael delayed speaking, it was because he carried a difficult decision in his heart, and this time was no different. As he told her what had happened, the small living room of the Brown family filled with tension and unanswered questions. The air grew heavier. Sarah, a woman of courage and faith, looked at her husband and, though surprised, understood. It was already hard enough to provide for Emily and Daniel with a construction worker's wages. Now there would be another mouth to feed. Yet despite her concern, she recognized in his gesture a rare strength, the ability to see in a stranger a brother worth protecting. And so the man was brought into the Browns' modest home. A makeshift bed in the corner of the room reflected the reality of those who had little but shared everything. Emily, only 7 years old, her braids decorated with colorful beads, curiously observed the mysterious guest. Daniel, just 5, barefoot and smiling, fired off endless questions as though trying to uncover the secret of this new uncle. At the construction site, Michael's co-workers wasted no time mocking him. Between laughter and sarcastic remarks, they said, "You already have 4 mouths to feed, and now you've picked up another one." Their words, spoken as a joke, cut deep, exposing the harshness of a world where compassion is mistaken for weakness. Still, Michael stood firm, unwilling to bend under judgment. It is curious how often people avoid helping others simply out of fear of being ridiculed. Yet the mockery did not paralyze him. He knew that every choice shaped not only his own life but also how his children would learn to see the world. And in that home, example spoke louder than any lecture. While working under the scorching sun, Michael thought of the bills, the mounting expenses, and the uncertainty of tomorrow. But when he returned home and saw his children smiling at the man, he felt a strange peace. Poverty was still present, but alongside it grew something else, the certainty that they were building a story of love and solidarity. Life carried on, as harsh as ever, but now marked by a mystery and a choice few would dare to make. And although he could not imagine it, That simple gesture was only the beginning of transforming his home into the stage of far greater events than he could ever dream. In the Browns' home, the unknown man began receiving simple yet heartfelt care. Sarah prepared warm soups, Emily and Daniel brought blankets, and Michael arranged the space so he could rest comfortably. The family's poverty was evident, but their hospitality made everything more dignified. That humble home transformed into a refuge for someone who, until then, had nothing. As days passed, the children naturally grew closer to him. Emily, with her colorful braids, sat by his bed sharing stories from school. Daniel, barefoot and always smiling, insisted on showing him his improvised toys. The man, still without memory, smiled back, as if those small gestures were an unexpected balm. Soon the family found a loving way to call him Grandpa John. Emily was the first to use the nickname, and Daniel quickly followed, swept up by his sister's affection. When the man heard it, a quiet emotion escaped him, as though he had found a role he never knew how to play. For the first time in a long while, he felt like part of something greater. At the modest dinner table, the atmosphere began to change. Conversations were filled with laughter, and the presence of Grandpa brought lightness to the days. Michael watched from a distance, torn between the worry of finances and the joy of seeing his children so happy. There was an invisible exchange taking place. While the family offered shelter, the man returned it with companionship and affection. Grandpa John, even without a defined past, showed tender gestures that touched everyone. At times, he helped Sarah peel vegetables or joined Emily in improvised songs. His physical fragility did not stop him from radiating a deep sense of presence. That stranger was no longer seen as a guest, but as family. Michael, however, still carried the unease of the future. He knew it was hard to maintain the household with so many responsibilities, but when he saw the children calling the stranger grandfather, he recognized the immeasurable value of it all. It was as if life, in its mysterious way, had given the children the chance to experience a love they would otherwise never have known. Neighbors watched with curiosity. Some whispered that the Browns were asking for trouble. But inside that modest home, the atmosphere was different. Peace reigned there. A rare peace, the sense that something divine was quietly unfolding. Each day with Grandpa John strengthened invisible yet solid bonds born of care and tenderness. And so, in the midst of a difficult routine, the Browns discovered new joy. The man who had lost his identity became a grandfather at heart to two lively children. And although the mystery of his past remained, one certainty grew stronger. That encounter was not just coincidence, but the beginning of something much greater that was still to come. Michael woke up early every day before the sun even rose. His body, heavy from the previous day's labor, seemed to beg for rest, but responsibility allowed no pause. He looked at his calloused hands and remembered that they were what kept his household standing. Now, besides his wife and children, there was someone else depending on him, and it consumed him in silence. As he walked to the construction site, his mind filled with calculations, his wages, the overdue bills, the food that needed to last until the end of the month. The weight was not only on his shoulders but in his heart. With every step, he wondered if he could carry it all alone. It was a battle between reason that shouted and faith that whispered. At lunchtime, sitting in a corner of the site, Michael ate in silence. His coworkers laughed and joked loudly, but he remained quiet. The noise around him could not drown out the worry gnawing inside. Still, amid the doubts, he remembered his children's happy eyes. That image was what kept him steady. When he returned home, Emily would run to show him a drawing she had made at school, and Daniel tugged at his hand to play. Sarah, with her weary look, greeted him with a smile that hid her own concern. And in the corner of the room, Grandpa John, sitting calmly, returned his gaze with gratitude. It was as though they all, without words, acknowledged his effort. Even so, the pressure grew heavier. Michael knew he could not support so many people for long without consequences. His mind filled with questions. How long could he endure? Should he have left the stranger at the hospital? These doubts haunted him Yet they never defeated him because compassion had already decided in his place. Curiously, even without memory, Grandpa John radiated an unexpected peace. When Emily lay on his lap to hear improvised stories, or when Daniel laughed at the funny faces he made, the house seemed lighter. Michael observed in silence, and for a few moments, forgot the hardships. It was as if that burden also carried with it an invisible gift. Deep down, he knew he could not live on tenderness alone. Rent did not wait, bills did not vanish, and children's stomachs did not fill by themselves. Yet at the same time, he understood that life was not made only of numbers. Sometimes what sustains a home is precisely what cannot fit on any spreadsheet: love. And so, Michael continued his daily struggle, torn between the weight of responsibility and the joy blossoming in his home. He did not yet know, but each sacrifice hid a greater purpose. And destiny, as patient as ever, was already preparing the next surprise, coming from where he least expected it. At the hospital, the days followed their frantic rhythm. Doctors and nurses handled cases that came and went, but one piece of news began circulating quietly through the corridors. There was a man admitted without memory, without documents, and seemingly alone in the world. This detail, which might seem trivial, caught the attention of people who never imagined they would find him there. An elegant lady, accompanied by two men in suits, entered the hospital with firm steps. Her eyes revealed the anxiety of someone searching for something precious. They had received information that a mysterious patient matched the description of someone who had gone missing. It was as though hope, once dormant, had begun to beat again. The doctors confirmed, yes, there was such a man, but they explained that he had been taken in by a construction worker who had refused to abandon him. This revelation only added urgency to the family's search, and they immediately asked for access to the records. The name Michael Brown, hastily written on the hospital forms, now became the key to finding the lost one. The two well-dressed men exchanged glances. They knew that every second mattered. While the lady clutched a photograph to her chest, their stern faces reflected a mixture of fear and expectation. In the air lingered the sense that this reunion could change not only the destiny of the lost man, but also their own lives. Meanwhile, Michael continued his routine, unaware of what was approaching. On the construction site, he carried bricks and cement, concerned only with earning the day's bread. He had no idea that his decision to take in a stranger had placed him at the center of a story that would soon knock on his door. At the hospital, the staff tried to organize the information to pass on to the family. There were still many gaps, many questions, but Michael's address was recorded. That was enough for the elegant lady to decide not to wait any longer. The search finally had a starting point. The black car parked outside the hospital reflected the power and wealth of those inside. As they entered, the three knew that their next destination was not just a visit, but a confrontation with the unexpected. The silence inside the vehicle was heavy, filled with memories and uncertainty about what they would find. And so, the family set off toward the Browns' home. The road seemed long, but their hearts beat faster with every mile. On the other side, a simple, humble house waited, unaware that soon it would become the stage for a reunion that would reveal hidden truths and provoke choices that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. It was a Monday afternoon, and Michael returned from the construction site with a tired body but a heart steady in its routine. As he approached his home, he noticed something unusual: a black car parked in front of the simple wooden gate. The contrast between the modest house and the imposing vehicle was striking. The air seemed heavy with premonition. Sarah, inside, was already watching through the window. Her gaze betrayed unease, as if she sensed something greater was about to happen. Emily and Daniel ran around the yard, innocent, unaware of what the stranger's presence meant. Grandpa John, sitting on the porch, stared intently at the gate, as though expecting that very moment without knowing why. Two elegant men stepped out of the car, impeccably dressed, their posture stern. Beside them, a refined-looking lady in sober attire walked with determined steps toward the entrance. There was no doubt they came from another world, one far removed from the Browns' simplicity. Every detail revealed wealth, influence, and an old pain still searching for resolution. Michael stopped at the gate, sweaty and covered in dust from the day's work, facing the visitors cautiously. The contrast was evident. On one side, a humble construction worker. On the other, people who bore the unmistakable marks of abundance. The silence that followed was thick with tension, as if time itself were holding its breath, waiting for the revelation. Suddenly, the lady crossed the gate and rushed to the porch. Her tearful eyes locked onto the man sitting in the wooden chair. "Gerald! Gerald Miller!" she cried, her voice trembling with emotion. Her body leaned into a desperate embrace, as though she were reclaiming a missing piece of herself. But the unexpected happened. The man, now called Gerald, furrowed his brow in confusion. With a serious expression, he gently pulled away from the embrace and, in a hesitant tone, asked, "Who are you?" Silence fell over everyone. The weight of that question was heavier than any word of recognition could have been. Michael stood still, watching the scene. His heart raced, as if he were at the center of a riddle that was not his, yet one he could not escape. Sarah, standing with the children, clasped her hands tightly, trying to contain her anxiety. That moment marked the collision of two worlds, one of simplicity and one of wealth, joined by a mystery no one yet understood. The lady, in tears, insisted, showing photographs, naming people, recalling memories. But Gerald remained distant, trapped in a fog that would not let him recognize the past. It was as though his mind rejected his former life. And so, at the Browns' gate, the story took another step forward, plunging them all into a destiny even deeper. The Browns' living room was silent but heavy with emotion. The photographs brought by the lady were spread across the worn wooden table. In the images, Gerald appeared at elegant parties, surrounded by family and friends. Everyone expected that this would awaken some memory in him, but his eyes wandered, unable to recognize that past. The men in suits spoke with conviction, recalling dates, trips, and stories. With every word, they hoped Gerald would react. Yet the old man's silence only deepened. He listened, he watched, but he seemed distant, as though that world belonged to another life that no longer felt like his. The tension grew with every passing second. Michael, seated in a corner, watched the scene without knowing how to act. He was only a construction worker, yet suddenly, he seemed to occupy a central role in this mystery. Gerald, torn between confusion and emotion, glanced at him often, as if seeking reassurance. It was as though the bond built over the past days was stronger than blood itself. The lady, tears in her eyes, insisted, "Gerald, we are your family." But the answer was unexpected. The man took a deep breath, looked her in the eyes, and with a steady voice declared, "I'll only go if my friend Michael comes with me. He is the one I trust." The words fell like thunder, startling everyone. Silence filled the room. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. He had never expected to be placed in such a position, much less to be the anchor of trust for a man who had everything in wealth but nothing in memory. Gerald's request was simple yet profound. He didn't just want to return, he wanted to bring with him the one who had shown him compassion. The lady breathed deeply and, after a moment's hesitation, agreed. The men in suits exchanged glances, realizing there was no room for imposition. Gerald's heart had already chosen its path. It didn't matter if his memories remained hidden. What mattered was the presence of the one who had held out a hand in his most fragile moment. Michael looked at Sarah, who remained silent, but whose eyes said everything. She knew this would change their lives forever. Emily and Daniel, not fully grasping the gravity of the situation, only smiled, happy that they would not lose their grandpa. For them, there was no mystery. What mattered was the love they felt. And so, before everyone present, the agreement was made. Gerald would return to his mansion, but he would not go alone. He would take with him the presence of the construction worker who had restored his dignity and hope. And in that instant, destiny tied the two families even closer, sealing a choice that went beyond lost memories and bloodlines. Gerald's mansion seemed like another world. Tall gates, manicured gardens, long hallways filled with works of art. For the Brown family, it was all impressive and almost unbelievable. Michael walked cautiously, as if stepping onto unfamiliar ground. Sarah, at his side, tried to hide her amazement so as not to alarm the children. Emily and Daniel, however, looked at everything with shining eyes. Every detail felt magical. The grand chandeliers, the soft couches, the windows revealing gardens so vast they seemed endless. To them, it was like stepping into a fairy tale castle they had only read about in books. Their innocent smiles lit up the space. Gerald, still not fully recovered in memory, remained serene. More than the objects of luxury, he longed for company. That is why he made only one non-negotiable request. Every Sunday, the Brown family had to join him for lunch. To that man, the true treasure was not his wealth, but the bond he had recently discovered. And so the Sunday gatherings began. At the piu, large table of polished wood, refined dishes were served. But what truly filled the air was the joy of conversation and the sound of laughter. Emily shared her school stories. Daniel played mischievously, and Sarah revealed simple recipes that surprised even the mansion's chefs. Michael at first felt out of place. Surrounded by crystal glasses and embroidered linens, he saw himself as a construction worker among luxuries that did not belong to him. But with each Sunday, he realized Gerald did not see those differences. To him, Michael was not just the man who had helped him. He was a friend, almost a brother, someone to share life with. The doctors, working diligently, sought to restore Gerald's memories. Gradually, fragments returned. He recognized names, places, events. Yet curiously, his heart had already decided before his mind could. His true family was the one that had welcomed him when no one else did. Sundays became tradition. It was like a sacred ritual where two different worlds met in harmony. There was no longer room for strangeness, only for togetherness. Gerald's home gained voices and movement, and the Browns' home gained an extension where the children ran freely through the gardens. In that setting, bonds grew stronger, and new memories were created. The mansion, once cold and silent, was now warmed by stories, laughter, and embraces. Gerald, surrounded by his new family, felt that life had given him a second chance. And even without realizing it, everyone knew destiny still had something grand waiting to be revealed. Over time, Gerald regained much of his memory. He recalled business deals, travels, and important decisions he had made throughout his life. Yet, when he closed his eyes, what surfaced first were not grand halls or boardroom meetings, but the Sundays spent around the table with the Browns. Those recent memories had become the most valuable of all. Moved by gratitude, Gerald decided to give back in a grand way. He bought a house in the best neighborhood of the city for Michael, just a short distance from his own mansion. He didn't want to offer only comfort, but closeness as well. After all, he wanted to watch Emily and Daniel grow, his new grandchildren at heart. Michael was stunned when he received the news. How could a simple construction worker ever imagine that one day his family would live in such a home? At first, he felt uncomfortable, as though he did not deserve so much. But Gerald was firm. This was not charity. It was recognition for a gesture that had changed his life. In addition to the house, Gerald offered Michael a position of trust in his company. Construction manager. He knew no one better than this man to oversee projects with honesty and dedication. Michael, long used to taking orders, now found himself leading teams carrying the responsibility of turning plans into reality. The Sundays remained a sacred ritual. Now, the two families gathered around abundant tables, filled with laughter, stories, and embraces. There were no longer divisions between rich and poor, only people bound by a connection that destiny, in its mysterious way, had built. In one of those gatherings, Gerald raised his glass in a toast. With his voice trembling, he declared that life had given him a gift greater than any fortune, a family expanded by love, not just by blood. His words moved everyone, and tears quietly rolled down their faces. Sarah, deeply touched, looked at her husband and saw in his eyes something different. Pride, not pride in what they had received, but in what they had become. Emily and Daniel, still children, might not have fully understood the depth of that moment, but they felt in their hearts that they were living something unforgettable. And so, in that home that once seemed improbable, a new story was born. The encounter between a simple construction worker and a billionaire had transformed into a legacy of gratitude, love, and unity. Life, in its mysterious ways, had proven that the greatest riches are not measured in numbers, but in eternal bonds. And now I ask you, how many times have you held back from acting out of fear of what others might think? How many opportunities to change lives, including your own, have passed by because they seemed too crazy or too impossible? Michael proved that the courage of a simple gesture can open doors that no fortune could ever unlock. And maybe that's the lesson you need today. Stop waiting for the perfect moment and start acting with what you already have. So tell me in the comments, where are you watching this story from? I really want to know how far this message will reach. And if this story inspired you to look beyond the obvious and believe that true wealth lies in the bonds we build, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Because this was just one of many stories that can change the way you see life, and you won't want to miss the next one.